On today's episode of Field to Rim, brought to you by Selton Sports, I wanted to have a conversation about the sneaker war. Many people are aware that Shaquille O'Neal and Allen Iverson are the employees of Reebok, serving in the capacity of president and vice president, respectively. But a lot of people don't understand the struggles that Reebok has encountered over the last few years and what they're attempting to do to rebrand themselves. So it's interesting that tomorrow is Allen Iverson's 49th birthday. It's interesting to know that for the last 30 years, he has been associated with Reebok brand. But the association has not come without problems for Reebok, to include but not be limited to no longer ranking anywhere next to the top 10 brands, respectively, let alone the top three in the NBA. Once known as one of the leading sneakers and footwear apparel companies over the last 20 years, that has since changed. Adidas sold Reebok in about 2006, give or take, for about, give or take, 2.4 billion. Some people say it was 3.8, depending upon the numbers. But we know what they're up against now in 2024. Reebok now is worth about 2.36 billion to 2.8 billion. That's their valuation. But the history of Reebok, which was founded in 1958, has not come without controversy. And some of the controversy includes, but is not limited to, the recent sale or acquisition of Reebok by Authentic Brands and Jamie Salter. When Jamie Salter acquired Reebok for about $2.8 billion, again, those numbers have been speculated. Some people say it was 2.4 billion. One of the things they did was, instead of contacting Allen Iverson, who was the brand and the name that built Reebok, they contacted Shaquille O'Neal to acquire his name, image, and likeness. Now, Authentic is known for purchasing companies that are falling off, if you will, no longer valuable, and or companies that have struggled. In that acquisition of Reebok, it may have directly included an association with Shaquille's Neal, name, image, and likeness. That was acquired for an unspecified amount of money. But what we do know is that Shaquille O'Neal then took that money, inquired about the sale and purchase, and then reinvested that money in Authentic Brand, thereby making him one of the largest individual shareholders for Reebok. A lot of people were disappointed that the person who built that house, the person who brought about fame and fortune for Reebok, put Reebok on the map, particularly in urban corridors around the country and hip hop, did not contact Allen Iverson. He was not part of that deal. So why would Authentic Brand bring in Shaquille O'Neal to be a quote unquote investor in a company in which Allen Iverson himself had built? At that time, it was clear that while Allen Iverson may not have had millions of dollars in assets available to him, he did have a Reebok trust to be valued at or about 32 million, and some say as much as $50 million, depending upon the interest that has been accrued over the years in which that trust has been sitting there, and how that trust, if at all, has been invested for him. Nevertheless, Allen Iverson's Neal, his name, image, and likeness, has always been more valuable than Shaquille O'Neal, despite Shaquille O'Neal being a former player of the Miami Heat and the Los Angeles Lakers, as well as the Orlando Magic. That being said, wherein many people have speculated that Shaquille had, in fact, had input in whether or not they would bring Allen Iverson in at that stage, and what influence, if any at all, he had over Jamie Salter. What is clear about the deal is that Allen Iverson was left out of it and instead reduced to nothing more than an employee under the leadership if you will, and a subordinate, if you will, to Shaquille O'Neal. Well, why does that matter? It matters because neither Dominique Wilkins nor Shaquille O'Neal nor Shawn Kemp could come close to generating the monies and or brand recognition and or relate to Gen Zs in the same manner that Allen Iverson has. He's not as relatable and or recognizable and or respectable among Gen Zs. But even wherein one takes into consideration Shaquille O'Neal's name, image, and likeness among Generation X and Y, even in that capacity, he did not come anywhere close to selling the shoes, footwear, and or apparel, if you will, as that of Allen Iverson. His excuse initially was that at that given point in time, he had been approached by several people, particularly those in urban corridors and low income individuals, that the Reebok sneaker cost a lot of money. But that is subject to speculation and whether that happened in that manner, primarily because at that time, Reebok had been a struggling brand, had been dedicated to women and women's apparel. And so they had not yet actually garnered the respect, despite Dominique Wilkins' participation and that of Shawn Kemp in the space of basketball. So if in fact it was about trying to market a product and or service to the Black community or urban community, or if in fact his inability to believe that the sneaker could sell was attributed to individuals unwilling to pay that dollar amount, then how just a few years later, with about 3 years later, would Allen Iverson come on the scene thanks to the likes of Todd Kay, although many give undue credit to the likes of Henry Q. Gaskin, a different show for a different time. Follow that on our documentary on the wrong ball, the Allen Iverson way, coming soon, and learn more about that, wherein it is believed that as soon as Allen Iverson signed to Reebok, their stock just went up. And I'm talking about street value, street credibility. And he sold sneakers that cost a few $100s. The question, the answer, etc. So if it weren't in fact predicated upon price margin, then why was he able to sell those sneakers and not Dominique Wilkins, the human highlight, who only competition at that time would have been Nike's with Michael Jordan? Converse was by Magic Johnson. And so these were the three leading Black players in the NBA during that period of the late 80s, early 90s. And so we know that Michael Jordan dominated with 6 championships during that period. But nevertheless, one would question why Allen Iverson was able to sell the sneakers at the price point and margin, but not Shaquille O'Neal. Need I say he was not relevant then as much as he is now? And if it was about dollars and cents, even when he attempted to sell his own brand of sneakers, even at outlets like Walmart, retail outlets that is, he still couldn't sell them. They were just not marketable. Charge it to his head, not his heart, I don't know. But even when you charge it to the pockets of the American consumer at that time, they weren't buying Reebok. So we look to who has the foothold on the sneaker world right now. At $51.22 billion, Nike has it, even with an investment of almost $11 billion in athletes across the country, and to include but not be limited to an emphasis on NC2A basketball and men's basketball, but also the NBA. When you look at the 2024, or what we call NBA All-Star Weekend 24, 14 sneakers hit the floor. 10 out of the 14 were dominated by Nike. Stephon Curry had his own brand, and then you have New Balance, and then it was Adidas. So what, if any, does Reebok need to do now in an effort to have secured some type of footing? Well, before we can discuss that, let us go back to the transaction that took place around 2021, when Adidas first announced that they were in the process of selling off their interest in Adidas. There were 2 people who took interest, particularly from the hip hop culture, in the purchase of Reebok. Most of us know him as Master P, but his legal name is Percy Miller. And then Baron Davis. Some people call him Byron Davis, an NBA All-Star. He made a decision to take an interest in the purchase of Adidas, which at the time had assessed the value of Adidas at about 2.4 billion. They couldn't move it. They couldn't close the deal. But the question was whether or not Master P and Davis were able to acquire the brand, or whether or not Adidas was not interested in selling the brand to Black owners. And that has become a big question in the space of sports, where Black athletes, particularly in the NFL and NBA, dominate that space. Now, let us be clear. A lot of people know Master P is a quote unquote rapper, music mogul, but he also has a multi-million-dollar business operation in a space that most people are unaware, and that is the food industry, where he has made an awful lot of money along with cannabis. And so he has made many great investments and is well connected with a female companion of his who is a billionaire. So it's clear that he had the resources and the connections to seal the deal. How and why did Authentic Brand get involved and then subsequently bring Shaquille O'Neal to the table, but not as an investor? When he brought Shaquille O'Neal to the table, it was through the lens of, let me buy your name, image, and likeness. So why was that about? I believe he did that with the sole intent of saying, I've acquired this brand. Now let me get a Black athlete like a Davis to help move this brand. And he was unsuccessful technically in the end, because the company since that time has been failing financially. They have not yet come close to garnering the respect in the sneaker war as needed to be able to defend against this war. But there have been things that have taken place over the last few years, which have been, and most people thought would be of great significance to the success of Reebok, and that included what happened with Yee. So we are aware of the Yeezy shoes that were sold by Adidas. We know about some of the alleged anti-Semitic comments that were made by Yee pertaining to why and how he believes Adidas sort of outsmarted him with the help, he believed, of his attorneys, wherein he believed that there was information that was not disclosed regarding logos, trademarks, exclusivity, and ownership rights. And he thought that as a result of that, they also were sabotaging his brand and ultimately resulting in his inability to sell his products through Adidas and ultimately create standalone stores and operations. So, wherein you can sell a pair of sneakers for $1,000 to $3,000, which is what some of the Yee shoes were selling for, one would think with the $1 billion contract that he had, that he himself should have branched off and sold his own sneaker. So, where you think about the battle or the war for who will be king or queen of the sneaker world, we look to Nike, we look to Adidas, Reebok, New Balance, Fila, and others. But what is or has become or could be attributed to why these companies who are struggling, like Reebok, would not sell to the very culture that built its brand, hip hop? Jay-Z signed with Reebok in 2003. And at that time, he released S. Carter's. And immediately, according to some studies and data, Reebok increased about 17%. But then Sean did something unique within about 3 to 4 years. He now was starting to promote Puma. And in just a few years after signing with Reebok, not only would he begin promoting Pumas throughout the city of New York, for which I'm a native, he also had the likes of Rihanna and a host of others to help him market and promote Pumas to the New York community. People sleep on New York. A lot of people don't understand the power of New York. In 5 boroughs alone, Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, and Staten Island, you have more than 8 million people just in the 5 boroughs. Our 5 boroughs comprise New York City. Although people say New York is Manhattan, there are 5 boroughs that comprise New York City. The 8 to 9 million, and those are registered, not illegals. And I respectfully state, we believe we have about 3+ million illegals who equally engage in purchasing power, the power of consumerism. So on average, you're looking at about 11 million people. To put that in perspective, that's about 2.5 states of Georgia. Because we question whether the state of Georgia, according to the last Census Bureau, has about 5 to 7 million people, give or take. And if in fact those numbers are accurate, because Georgia seems to play with their numbers, but let me even give them the high end of 8 million. So that means an entire state of Georgia and a half. But then you look at states like Iowa, okay? And you look at the number of people in the state of Iowa, which is about 3 million, give or take. And so you're now talking about almost 4 states of Iowa, which is the Hawkeyes, Caitlin Clark. So now you see where I'm going. If you just look at the city of New York alone, not comparing it to a state, and you look at the purchasing power for the state of New York, outside of that, it is super. But wherein you place an emphasis on the 5 boroughs and the diversity of the 5 boroughs and the power of the Black consumers in the city of New York, and then you bring that to other cities like Miami and Atlanta, Los Angeles, Chicago, and then you ask yourself, what, if any, could Reebok have done to galvanize, to secure, to reclaim its brand by targeting major cities like New York, not Newark, New Jersey? And instead of placing an emphasis on athletes, just started marketing to the city as a whole. What might they have been able to accomplish? New York has always been known for black top basketball. Has Reebok done enough to capture that audience? We know that Adidas has. Their New York is that when you mention Reebok, they're going to laugh at you. We Adidas. Nike's has some footing in a place like New York City, but Adidas has dominated New York City for many years also. Why? Adidas has always connected itself to urban youth. Adidas has always made itself available, respectfully, to our blacktop basketball, our Rutgers tournament, our AAUs, supported our public school systems, okay, entrepreneurship among youth, our charter schools. So wherein you garner that type of respect, just regardless of who's there, people will wear them. And I know people think that because they can connect their brand to hip hop, that in and of itself is likely to ultimately result in an increase in sales. But we also recognize that it becomes temporary. We saw that when they attached their brand to Sean Carter, Jay-Z. We saw that when they attached their brand to 50 Cent. We saw that when they attempted to attach their brand to Cardi B. So these were 3 leading individuals, respectfully, that ultimately switched their brand and their branding power and started wearing Puma, to include but not be limited to Cardi B. Even though Cardi B was rapping about Angel Reese wearing Reebok, even though Cardi B has signed off with Reebok, Cardi also wore Pumas and Adidas. And she wore Nike too. So wherein there may not be an agreement of exclusivity, as we know, Sean Carter will wear Nike, Sean Carter wore Pumas, all while under the Adidas / Reebok brand. So what am I saying? The sports apparel industry, particularly sneaker heads all over, are a very strong consumer base for companies like Nike, Adidas, and Reebok. What we do know is that by 2025, according to Cohen and some other data and research, anyone in this space is looking at a total, and that includes across the board, of about $6 billion just on sneakers. Just on sneakers, not any other apparel. But they're looking to make about $6 billion just on sneakers here in the domestic United States, just between Adidas, Nikes, and we hope Reebok. So you say, well, how is that? We know that Nike's percentage is not just simply on sneakers, but a percentage is also spent on apparel. We know the same is true where we look at the numbers for Adidas and Reebok. But the $6 billion by 2025, they're suspecting that that is what Adidas is going to be making on sneakers alone. Doesn't include the numbers for Nike. So if Adidas is going to be possibly increasing to about $6 billion in sales just on sneakers, that may take them from about the $23 billion that they are allegedly and or purportedly made for last year. What might that do for Nike, who is a stronghold in this space? So if Adidas is speculated to increase to $6 billion, in addition to the money they already made, and we know that Reebok sales have dropped more than 50%, is Reebok eventually, by 2025, going to end up in bankrupt? Will they be in bankruptcy? What is Reebok attempting to do to survive and strive? And I'm telling you, a lot of people are disappointed in how Reebok negotiated the deal that ultimately left out a key factor and then backpedaled, realizing they did that, and then in turn tried to come in and bring Allen Iverson as an employee. You cannot bring him in as an employee on a house that he built. Shaquille O'Neal, to date, has not been effective, Reebok, and branding the brand, meaning he has looked to people, places, and things that he knows. And I know a lot of people feel like he's a businessman, and I'm not going to ever take that from him or anyone else. But you have to look at the businesses that people give him credit for. The businesses to which he's given credit for are houses he never built, are companies where he's never technically served in a CEO capacity. And I say that respectfully. Let's look at some of the businesses to start with. Papa John's. That's not a house that Shaquille O'Neal built. He's a franchisor. So you own a few. But he's not responsible for the brand of Papa John's, no more than he's responsible for the brand of the General. So when you look to some of the companies in which he's been given credit for by most people who aren't following these companies in terms of their financial successes and or failures, people ultimately think, well, he's a businessman. Let's bring Shaquille to the table. And I think bringing Shaquille O'Neal to the table of Reebok was the biggest mistake that Jamie Salter could have made. And I think if they do not capture the audience for which they're attempting to capture, and 2025, this company is going to fail. It's going to end up in bankruptcy. And Jamie Salter will take a major hit. What they should have done was offer Allen Iverson a deal for his kneel, and then let Allen Iverson flip that money back. And I think what they thought they were doing by trying to circumvent those of us who are already working on a documentary like ours, Ron Ball, the Allen Iverson way, was attempt to secure maybe life rights to do their own documentary so that they had some type of power there. And unfortunate for Allen Iverson, I don't know if he has the necessary lawyers or legal team that he once had. I mean, I know some reasons why he thought David Falk, had done him wrong, but David Falk didn't. You look at the top 40 athletes that David Falk had, every single one of them are still in the black right now, not in the red, respectfully. And so, having said that, what if Allen Iverson were to be given an opportunity to receive funds for his kneel, broker a deal doing that, flip that money back into Reebok, let people know that he too is a shareholder, not an employee, under the leadership of Shaquille O'Neal, someone who, although they may have won in 2001, he has nothing to do with the success of Reebok or its brand. People don't like it. They don't want to see him out there as an employee. They don't want to see him out there as a prop for Reebok. They want to see him in a position of authority, of ownership. That is the house that he built. Doing a documentary on him through the lens of Reebok, directly or indirectly associated with Shaquille O'Neal, is not going to get people to run out and buy Reebok. It's not. In fact, many of us believe the only reason why, in part, he wants to do the documentary on Allen Iverson is with the intent to showcase the 2001 run with hopes that it will do one or two things. Make people think about Reebok through the lens of that era, and or give more consideration and or respect to or recognition to Shaquille O'Neal. And a lot of that has to do with the commentary made by Devin Booker. Devin Booker represents, just like CJ Stroud in the NFL, Devin Booker for basketball represents this new generation of football players and basketball players, right? So CJ is on the basketball side. Pinks is on the basketball side. Devin is on the basketball, CJ is football. We are Texan. Devin Booker is basketball. So whether you're basketball and or football, respectfully, that generation does not recognize and or respect Shaquille O'Neal as an athlete. They know what he did. Great, fine. But if you're asking them to respect his game, his hustle as it pertains to this generation now, neither basketball nor football. Let me make sure that's clear. CJ is football. We are Texan. QB, one of 17 now. Quarter blacks, okay? And Devin is basketball. So even when you're looking at these two gentlemen with their respective sports, they don't have the same level of respect. And they speak for this generation of ballers, be it basketball and or football. So what do you do about that? How do you convince the CJ Strouds of football, okay, and the Devin Bookers of basketball that Reebok is relevant? Okay, you say, well, they're under different brands now. Of course they are. But wherein CJ Stroud is still having conversations about who's a quote unquote killer on the basketball court, that's why I was getting twisted up there. You have to ask yourself, what interest, if any, does CJ have to basketball? He used to play. So CJ know a little something about basketball too. He just chose football as the ultimate outcome for him. His life is similar, if you will, to Allen Iverson, a father that was incarcerated. He played two sports, etc., etc. So look into the future. How does Reebok rebound in 2025? One of the ways that you need to give consideration to is correcting Jamie Salter, what you screwed up. You're not going to get people to respect the transaction that brought Shaquille O'Neal into the Reebok family and the manner in which he is. And it's clear. The problem that Reebok had is the same problem that hip hop has. It's the same problem that Adidas has. When Adidas refused to sell or allow blacks to acquire their business, that became the business of hip hop. When Adidas refused to allow blacks to acquire its company, the division of Reebok, it created a problem in hip hop. Imagine if Adidas respected hip hop culture and black men and women in business and were willing to sell and or allow for these groups to acquire the company. What would be the ultimate outcome of Reebok today? For Shaquille O'Neal or Reebok to now think that you could go back to the likes of Jay-Z and think Jay-Z is going to promote your brand. Jay-Z is worth 5 times the amount of Shaquille O'Neal's valuation. He's not going to be your employee. And that mentality is not going to help you brand. When you're known as someone who's arrogant, who's distant, who's unrelatable, people won't respect you the same. To think that a businessman now, like 50 Cent, Curtis Jackson, could be used as a prop to help promote Reebok is unconscionable. These are businessmen. Look at their valuations. And 50 is not worth a fraction of what Jay-Z is worth, Sean Carter. So we laugh here in New York, from here to the Bay, when you think you could take Jay and make him a prop for pay. Like, come on now. That's about all I have to say. Thank you for joining me today on Filter Rim, the Sneaker War, brought to you by Seltzer Sports. This is Lisa Hampton _ on Twitter.